Before we get started, I want to explain what exactly is basic cloth or basic cape. Here we have two different miniatures. One is the Brother Is There piece, and another is a custom that I'm doing. And one of them has complex cloth and the other one has basic. Okay, so let's look at basic first. Basic cloth is what we've been doing lately on the tutorials, and the reason for that is it's the easiest to learn and do quickly. And that's not to say that it looks less appealing, and in fact there are reasons to go this route over complex that you'll see in a minute. Okay, and I'll get to those once we compare the two. So you can see that we apply the green stuff, we build in the motion, and then it is one thin layer, okay? Because it's one thin layer, you actually get a lot of realism this way. It's more realistic to have that thin cloth instead of it all built up and looking really, really thick and dense. Okay, so that's a look at basic. Now you can get a look at the complex here on the Brother Is There. You have a lot more folds, you have multiple layers, multiple panels of cloth. These are two separate pieces that are split right here, making it a sort of a surcoat style. To do this, what you need to do is build up several layers. You also need to block in all of the voids. There can't be any empty space in between, for example, his leg and his cloth. Because this was going to be a cast piece, all of those voids needed to be built up. So if you're going to be doing these wrinkles and these lines and these build-ups, you can do that, but there needs to be a lot of substructure built up first. Okay, and we will get to that in a future video. We will learn how to do this, but we're going to learn to do the basics first so that you guys have good fundamentals on what to expect, okay? So let's get to how to sculpt a basic cape. All right, and there is, again, a reason to do this basic over the complex. It looks, because it's thinner, it looks more realistic. You can also have these voids. See how there's light coming through in the gaps? That's how cloth actually would be. And a lot of this complex cloth, while it looks good stylistically, if you look at it on other miniatures, you can see that a lot of times there's a lot of thick areas built up, and that makes the cloth look really, really thick. There can't be any of those voids, and so it just doesn't look as realistic. Anyway, we will get to a better comparison of that in future videos. We are going to be adding a cape to this piece. We're going to be just doing simple. And hopefully it doesn't conflict too much with this being complex and the cape being simple, in other words, thinner and with voids. I don't think it will, as this is not terribly thick. I think it'll look just fine. So when you are looking to put a cape on something, you really need to be paying attention to what direction of movement, what the dynamic of movement your miniature will have. So for this piece, his movement is going from here out, okay? So look at a miniature that you're going to be working on and look at the cloth that already exists, or the purity seals, or the hair, or whatever flowing material is on that piece. And you're going to follow that with your cape, okay? Because it just makes sense. If you're going to have the cloth going this way and the cape going out this way, it's not going to look right. It's going to look unnatural, okay? So if I were to add purity seals or even chains to this piece later, I would have them all going this way, all right? And we'll talk about more of that in composition and motion dynamics. But you need to remember the cloth is very fluid. It's kind of like water in that it flows. Right? It flows in kind of ripply patterns, especially if you're going to do something billowing, but it also drags, okay? So, for example, if this guy were to move his arm back or forward or up or down, the cloth would react. because he is walking and he has a leg up this way, the cloth is sculpted as if the wind were coming this way and it whipped it through his leg and up through this way. Okay? So to understand those dynamics, and again we'll go over that in a future video, but to understand those dynamics, it'd be a good idea to study a lot of art, watch videos of people that have cloth on them, and just so you can understand how that works. All right, so to begin, we rolled out our green stuff already. We're going to set that to the side, covered up so it doesn't get dirty at all, and we're going to set our miniature to the side. You can build for capes if you're new to this. I highly recommend trying this out. You can actually build yourself sort of a template with your paper. And what you can do is kind of carve out an idea of what you're going to do for the cape with the green stuff once it's to a cured state. And we are going to let it cure for quite some time. Okay. The thing about cloth is the more it's going to be detached and billowing and hanging off the miniature, the more it needs to be allowed to cure and harden so that it's not as impressionable, right? It's not weeping and relaxing and flowing down over the miniature. Instead, it keeps its rigidity. So we are going to let this cure for quite some time. Now, as far as the template, I'm going to have the cape coming off to the side like this, okay? So what I'm going to do is cut out a template that I think would work to kind of give me an idea of the shape that I want. Now, what I am looking to do is probably have an attachment point here, and then have it come around, flow out this way, and then have it come around and come behind the pauldron on his left side. All right. Another thing you need to take in consideration when attaching capes is the cape going to go? Is the cloth going to go underneath a plate of armor? Is it going to go over it? You know, what's the look going to be? Because then that will decide the build order of your miniature. Do you put the arm on first? Do you put it on after? That sort of thing. Anyway, we'll keep it, but we're going to keep it basic in this video. So this looks pretty close. I'm going to cut out a U shape. The beautiful thing about green stuff is that even if you were to cut it out this shape, of course you can sculpt and alter it, tuck it in, and do all that to really help yourself out. I think I'm going to go with something like this, and I'm going to ignore the backpack stud there because we are going to cut that off anyway, so that's not going to matter. So I think that is actually a good fit. So what you'll do is you can actually place this over your green stuff when you go to cut it out. Okay, and if that does not have enough space, cut out the general shape. So see how I don't have enough to do this detail here? That's fine. Once this is actually attached, I can pull it to give it that shape. Okay, but anyway, that is a little trick that you can do to kind of give you an idea of what shape you need to cut for your green stuff. I don't do it that often anymore. Having done quite a few of these, I've kind of gotten to the point where I can eyeball it and just kind of make it work. But it's never a bad idea to make a template first. So we're going to come back after this cures for a while, and then we're going to apply it to our miniature. Meanwhile, I'm going to remove this stud. You want to remove a lot of this prominent detail so that it doesn't poke up through the miniature. Okay. The same reason on Space Marines when we take the chest detail off when we're adding stuff for tabards and shirts and things like that, because you don't want it to poke through. Okay, so come back after this is cured. I would let it cure for almost an hour, more or less, and I will show you examples of what it will look like when it gets to that cure stage. Now that we've waited about an hour, let's give this a try. Keep in mind, though, that your green stuff might be at a different state depending on your ambient temperature, how much blue you put in, how much yellow you put in. There's a bunch of different factors. So instead of just waiting an hour and calling it good, do the following test. All right. Cut yourself a little sliver of your material. It is pretty good, I think, just right. Okay, and what I do is I'll stretch it, and then put it into a loop, And if you can pull the loop out without breaking the strip, you're about where you want to be. Okay? So don't just wait an hour and call it good. Actually try that test. It should help. All right. So let's cut our shape. We're going to get some oil on the knife so that the green stuff doesn't stick to the steel and the knife pulls it off the paper and then messes everything up. We want clean cuts if possible. It may still grab, but we'll try and make do. So cut the shape that you think that you're going to need. Okay, I'm going to hold this side with the paper. I'm going to cut a loop like that, and maybe another one like this, kind of give that basic shape. Okay, and then for the bottom of the cape, I'm going to cut like that. This is your opportunity to trim out any undesirable areas. Maybe you got bubbles, maybe you got a little dust, whatever. You can trim out just the piece that you want. Now, because I also want it to curve around the back of his shoulders, we're going to trim it like, I'm going to favor it with a longer line this side because the cloak is going to be flowing from his left side and bunching up a little bit on his right. So we're going to shorten up the right side. Oop. And if that happens, fold your paper over, hold it down like that. Okay. All right. That looks like it'll be pretty good. All right, we have our miniature set up in a little handle there. Before we apply our cape, we're going to apply some hand sanitizer. This alcohol will clean up the surface areas that we're going to attach our cape to. And this miniature is not overly greasy, but as you handle miniatures and as you assemble them, they tend to get finger oil and all sorts of stuff on them. There's also mold release to consider and other things. So when you're applying green stuff that has been curing for a while and it has lost a lot of its stickiness, anything to help it bond will be useful. So one side applies the hand sanitizer and the other side dries it off. Okay, so now you can kind of just blow on it to get rid of the bits. Now what we're going to do, because your hands are clean and not oily, it may be useful to just put a little hand sanitizer on your own hand. We're just going to apply softly. Don't grip it. No need to rough handle this. And you just stick it on there, kind of like we did with the tabard. Okay. Now I kind of want it to stretch a bit. So what I'm going to do is hold this side, and I'm going to pull this out like this and just kind of pinch it, drag like that, pull it out. Okay, and what you're doing is you're pulling material. Okay, and then the reason that we roll it out to the thickness that we did is to allow ourselves a little bit of wiggle room to work with, a little bit of play. Right? I also want to cover more of this shoulder, so I'm going for a gunslinger kind of look with this build. That's why I did a little revolver there. And I think that it will look better if I cover a little bit more of the shoulder. So that's probably good. So it is sticking pretty decently since we cleaned it off. One thing when you're working on capes is make sure you're always looking at the entire piece. Don't get focused up here and then you see this. See this part here? It starts to weep. With gravity it starts to settle and it'll fall down here and then it'll start to fall into the crevices, and eventually you have detail from the piece coming up through into your green stuff. Don't allow that to happen. So pop it back out, let it stretch around this way, and then start to lay it down. Okay, Now, here's what takes so long about capes, is that you're going to have to babysit this thing doing this until this cures. That could be an hour, right? So keep pulling this out. And if you want to use a little bit of oil on your fingers or water so that you don't get fingerprints on this and you can see how it stays nice and smooth, that's a decent idea. Just don't use too much and allow it to dissolve or evaporate before you paint, of course, or you're going to have to clean it up with more alcohol. So just keep pulling it and pulling it until it starts to get to the length that you want. Okay? And as you're doing that, get your anchor points established. So we're going to come around to this side, and we're going to make this look like maybe it's tucked in underneath this pauldron. So we're going to stick it under there, trim it. And one thing that's good about the rigid flat brushes is that they are good at establishing that base, that anchor. Oh, looks like we got a little bubble there, so we'll just pop that real quick and then get the air out. So that's what you're going to be doing for a little while, is establishing this anchor and getting it to length. Now make sure before too long, see there's a lot of things to keep track of when you're doing cloth and capes. Before too long, you start working in, anchor over his shoulder, start working in your folds. So where it's bunched up under an anchor point, remember how just the same as with, right? The same as with tabards, we have anchor points that we're going to draw our detail from. See if we can get this. Alright, so we're going to start drawing in some detail and some folds. All right, so we've been working on it for a little while now. We're going to start to pinch in some details here. So just grab certain areas and just start experimenting. You want to follow a flowing pattern, so make it irregular too. If you have an open area here, bunch it up at the end. Really study cloth, whether it's in drawings, paintings, photos, and see if you can imitate that flowing nature of it. Wherever cloth gathers around something or it's pulled tight, you're going to have these lines, right? But those lines follow the same motion of the cloth, right? Let's get in real close here and give you a decent look here. All right, we're going to get a little bit of oil on our knife. We're going to really define these folds with the back of the tip of the knife. There we go. And then you can keep working in that detail. So the cape is going to be bunched here, but then it's going to drag out this way and flow that way. So that way we copy the motion dynamic of our miniature, which is flowing from his, again, from his left down to his right. Let's back the camera out. Okay, so make sure that you're checking your miniature as you're sculpting. Make sure that your dynamics look good, that you're flowing from one point to another. You want to work from the inside out when you're doing capes, okay? Because you're going to secure your points of contact, your anchors. You're going to press down. You're going to work your tight detail, and then you're going to start adding the motion. And remember to establish some anchor points before this gets too hard. You got to get anchor point here so it's touching the miniature. And you can go on his shoulder. I like to press down and establish a good anchor here, but then pop the material back out so it has some definition. You can take your corners and make them a little bit more dramatic so that it looks like the cloth comes out and then jumps back in. You just got to really study what cloth looks like. So there we go. Now I'm going to keep working on this until this cures. There's another thing you can do if you're needing to set this down and walk away from it. What you can do is get yourself a clip base. Let's back the camera out a bit so you can see it a bit easier. What you'll do is, you can find these on Amazon, you can find them everywhere, is you can use gravity to your advantage. So what you'll do is clip this. Let's see if we can focus. You can clip this in and then tilt it so that gravity actually helps you by pulling the cloth in a certain direction. However, if your cure state is too fresh, if you're still soft in the epoxy, what it will do is it will take all your detail and it will just take the shape of gravity. And in other words, it will just flatten out, start to pull it, and you'll have a curtain. It won't look anything like what you wanted it to. So just do that for a moment and then come back to it. This is why capes take so long, guys. This is why they are so time consuming. Okay, so just keep working your detail. Keep refining your motion. There are certain aspects of motion, certain shapes that are only possible at later cure stages. All right, another thing, if you're working on this, see, and I have this held down, what this piece is going to start to do is start to move this way. It's going to start to move that way with gravity, right? So constantly be checking and moving your miniature. One thing that you can do to keep the shape, if you need to go do something like answer the door or whatever, you need to get up and attend to something, is carry the miniature in your hand as you're walking around and be rotating it in your hand. Do like figure eights and things like that, so that gravity and motion kind of create a circular force around it to kind of keep everything in its shape, right? It's getting really sciencey. But that it does work. Many times I've had to get up and take a miniature with me, and I'm sitting there spinning it in my hand when I'm answering the door or whatever else. So it is a dedication of time for sure, but there are ways to kind of cheat it. Okay, so this is a basic cloth in that there's the one layer, it's thin, it looks realistic. This is how cloth would actually be. But if you want to dramatize it and make it look like this, you can to a certain degree, but it is difficult with this thin material, because to be able to work these lines and this base into this cloth, you have to have a rigid base to push against, right? So if I try to later, when this cures, put some lines, another layer on top so that I can sculpt on it, this is just going to bend and move, and so it's very difficult. All right, so to be able to do this, this complex look with all these lines, you have to do it in layers. You have to have substructure, and we'll learn that in a later video, but I want you guys to learn this method first. Okay, come around, and now we're going to define this side as best we can. It's pretty dry, but the backpack's going to go over the top anyway, so you won't really see it. This is going to tuck behind the other shoulder. So we have an anchor point here, and we can pop this off of the miniature, give it a kind of a wave, but without it flying all over the place. Make sure you find your anchor points. So there you go. Hope that helps. Just keep working this until it cures. Check your motion, make sure that everything looks good. You fill in empty areas with some dynamic shape, and just experiment, guys. This is really muscle memory, and just by touch to be able to do this just takes practice. So I want you guys to get familiar with this method, and then we'll move on to other cloth methods.